What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Unlock Your Potential. I'm your host, Francesco Bartolillo, and I'm really excited about today's episode because today's topic is something that's actually impacted me pretty heavily the last couple weeks. And so it forced me to go searching and looking for answers to some of the difficulties that I was having, and just allowed me to kind of learn and grow myself. And so I'm hoping I can share those findings with you for anybody who might have been experiencing something similar, either in the past or currently, or might encounter this in the future. And so today's topic is going to be on discipline and building habits. And again, the reason I really wanted to cover this topic today is because I myself had fallen out of my habits and routines the last couple of weeks. And I found that my discipline muscle, which we'll talk more about, was quite weak over the last couple of weeks. And that had this domino effect on everything I would normally do. And so it was funny because I came to the realization because of that, that all these things that I thought maybe weren't that important or weren't actually helping me or, weren't effective, they actually served a bigger purpose. And so sometimes the benefit of any type of habit or routine or action might not be the obvious thing or what you think it is, but it could have, an impact in a different way. And so, we're going to cover, what is discipline, because there's a lot of different definitions out there, and maybe not necessarily define it today, but just share some of the ones that I like, some of the definitions that I find, resonate with me. We'll talk about what happens when you fall off track, when that discipline muscle starts to get weak, and how can you, train it? How can you make it stronger? How can you get back on track? And then we'll also talk about, building habits and how that correlates to discipline, and actually give you some, real world, real life ways of doing that. Because often I find people say, they'll tell you, oh, you need discipline, it's important. And they'll even tell you the reasons why it's important, but they won't actually tell you how to become more disciplined. And so I'm hoping that from some of the podcasts I listened to and some of the pieces that I read, that, strategies that I've developed and, maybe I slipped away from the last couple of weeks and now getting back on track, I can share that experience and those findings with you, and hopefully it helps you. So to start off today, just defining discipline. I have a couple of just, definitions here that I wanted to share. And the first one is from, at least Abraham Lincoln is credited with it, which is discipline is giving up what you want now for what you want most. And that's very similar to Ryan Holiday's definition of discipline, which is doing something now for a reward or an outcome that you may not see for a very long time. And so just as we dissect those two definitions down a bit, just because those are the ones that I really liked, it really comes down to discipline being doing something right now or not doing something right now, sacrificing something right now for something later on, something bigger, something more important, something more meaningful, whatever that is. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do because we're as humans, we always want almost this instant gratification. We want this immediate feedback. And a lot of times if we're trying to be disciplined in doing something, when we do it, we don't get that immediate feedback. And so somebody who's maybe, trying to lose weight, by not, eating that junk food, they're not going to all of a sudden wake up the next morning and have lost 10 pounds. But by eating the junk food, they may get the immediate response of, the dopamine and the feel good and all that stuff from eating the sugar. And so it's really hard to make that disciplined decision not to do this now, because I might not see the benefits of this until way down the line. And so it's really keeping that big picture in mind when you're trying to be disciplined, and recognizing that I'm giving something up now, or I'm doing something now because I know down the road that's going to be the thing that helps me get there. That's going to help me achieve my big picture. And so this is tough because a lot of times when we're trying to be disciplined, when we're trying to establish habits, when we're trying to achieve really great things, a lot of times we have to do it when nobody's looking. And that is one of the pieces, the accountability piece, which we will, elaborate more on. But it's 6 a.m., alarm clock's ringing, you said you're going to go to the gym and nobody's around. And then all of a sudden you start telling yourself, oh, I don't really need to. And, I don't need to work out today, or I can go later, or whatever the case is. And you convince yourself you don't need to, and there's nobody to hold you accountable. And that's a really difficult thing. Or for myself, that was always my cold plunge. I did my cold plunge challenge 30 days straight, and then I wanted to continue doing it, but I was no longer had the accountability piece, the external accountability of posting on social media every morning and people seeing that. And now all of a sudden it was like, oh, you know what, I don't need a cold plunge today, or I'll just do a cold shower. And then a cold shower turned into 20 seconds in the cold shower, and that turned into no cold shower at all. And so it has this ripple effect. And so it's, how do you remain disciplined when nobody's looking? Or do you need to instill elements of reward or some form of habit forming in order to remain disciplined until that becomes ingrained in who you are? And I wanted to bring up, I believe it was Kobe Bryant featuring on a podcast with Jay Shetty, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of my favorite clips of all time, and it's Kobe Bryant saying, basically, starts by saying, there's no negotiating. I'm not negotiating with myself. He's talking about his workout plan for the summer that he made. He said, at the start of the summer, I made a deal with myself that this is what I'm doing, this is the plan, and there's no negotiating. And so he talks about the story you'll start to tell yourself. You know, oh, I'm a bit sore, or maybe if I change this, or maybe if I do that. And he says, no, it doesn't matter. There's no story. I'm not negotiating with myself. And I think that's a really tough piece for a lot of people, is not negotiating with yourself, not trying to listen to the story that your brain and your mind wants to tell you in those moments of weakness. Because at 6 a.m., it's really easy to convince yourself not to get out of bed. And so in those moments, you have to, non-negotiable, this is what I'm doing. I've said I'm going to do it. I've set out to do it. And that's just who I am. And that really correlates a lot to, another piece from a podcast I listened to this week, which was saying how we do what we believe we are. So if I believe that I am a person who gets up at 6 a.m. no matter what, and all the evidence I have shows that, then I'm going to do that. But if I tell myself, oh yeah, you're somebody who gets up at 6 a.m., but then for the last week, I haven't got up once at 6 a.m., well, then it doesn't really have any power. There's no power around that belief. And all of a sudden that belief of who you are changes. And so it's having these little promises that build up to the bigger ones. And that's part of that success of creating discipline and creating habits, is don't give up on the small promises. If you make yourself a small promise, even if that's something as simple as, I'm going to drink a glass of water every morning first thing I wake up, don't miss it. Don't ever skip on one of the small promises, because if you skip on the small ones, it's going to be even harder to skip the big ones, or to not skip the big ones, sorry. And so this is something that I can correlate back to my last couple of weeks here. I started with cold plunges. I stopped doing my cold plunges just one morning. Kind of got, it was cold out, conditions weren't great, whatever the case was. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to do my cold plunge this morning. And then all of a sudden later that day, I made the decision, I believe it was, to not go to the gym. So all of a sudden in one day, 2 habits of mine that are kind of ingrained in who I am, just out the window. And all of a sudden the next morning, I didn't even wake up when the alarm clock went off. And all of a sudden I found myself here 2 weeks later, and I hadn't shot or recorded a podcast for 2 weeks. My content output had gone down for my business. I had probably 50% the amount of workouts that I normally do in a 2-week period, and I hadn't cold plunged other than one morning for 2 weeks. And so all of a sudden it was like, wow, this snowball effect of little decisions turning into big ones, and all of a sudden I've kind of let go of all the discipline I would normally have. I let go of all the things that make me who I am. And so normally, I would think before this experience that, oh, what's the big deal if I don't cold plunge for one morning? It's not a problem at all. But then as I started to realize over this last 2-week period, was that those have ripple effects down the road, because all of a sudden that decision not to cold plunge in the morning, when I had to make the decision, I chose against it. I chose the easier path. Well, then later in the afternoon when I really should have made some content, I chose not to. And then the impact of that was the next day when I was actually busy and I didn't have time to do it, I didn't have my content in reserve. I didn't have that, the spare content that I normally would have. And that's a video I recently made on my business's social media, was the importance of having, your content in reserve for those days that you don't have time or aren't feeling up to it, or whatever the case is. But I skipped out on that because my discipline levels were low and I let myself go in that sense. And so it's that idea of, okay, how do we prevent that from happening? Or if it happens, how do we pull ourselves back in? And so first we'll address when it happens, because it's going to happen. So be ready for moments of discipline to just go away. Be ready for that falling off the wagon, so to speak, because those moments are going to happen. It is inevitable in 99.9% of people. I think what we have to recognize is it's not all or nothing. All or nothing is almost a cop-out. And the reality is you can make mistakes. You can miss a workout day. You can miss, a meal prep. You can, miss a date night, whatever it is. But you don't want that new habit to form. You don't want that to become the norm. And so the best thing you can do is actually give yourself a bit of grace on the days that you miss it and recognize, okay, you know what? I didn't cold plunge this morning. Tomorrow morning, no questions asked, I'm getting in that cold water, no matter what. And what that does is that'll just help you from not only just building that little bit of that discipline muscle, but it'll also kind of encourage that mindset of, oh, I might miss a day, but I'm the person that always comes back from it. I'm the person that doesn't miss 2 days in a row. Because if you do, then all of a sudden you become the person that misses 3, 4, etc. And I don't want to be that person. So just because you miss a day, it's not the end all be all. Just because you have a mistake or, you mess up or you have a cheat day or whatever the case is, it's knowing that that's not the end all be all, and it's not all or nothing. It's bumps in the road, and like any successful graph you ever hear about or talk about or see on social media, it's up and down with an upward trend. So we never miss 2 days in a row. We never have 2 cheat meals back to back, whatever it is. It's that idea that just because we mess up once doesn't mean it's the end. And it doesn't mean we have to start from scratch either. And just touching on that is the idea of, like, for example, a cheat day. Well, instead of having set cheat days where you're like, oh, today's my cheat day, don't plan for it. Because I can almost guarantee you, if you plan for a cheat day, you're going to cheat on that day. If you plan to not work out or to have a bad meal, you're going to take that because it's in your schedule, it's easy, and it's an excuse that you've given yourself. And what ends up happening is sometimes we'll make a mistake. For example, we'll lack discipline in the morning and we won't work out. And then in the afternoon, we'll have that chocolate bar and all of a sudden we'll be like, oh, today's a cheat day. And so the whole day is a write-off. Well, that doesn't need to be the case. Instead, maybe take the opposite approach. Maybe we say, oh, you know what? This morning I didn't work out. Today, the rest of the day, I'm going to be as disciplined as possible to make up for that. And that approach instead will allow you to have hiccups or moments where you lack discipline, but it won't turn into this cheat day or cheat weekend or cheat week, which is something I experienced this last couple of weeks. And so recognizing that really can make a difference. So that's the idea of when you get it wrong. Can you bounce back as quick as possible? Can you set those standards for yourself that, moments of weakness and moments where my discipline is lacking do not become the new habit or the new norm. And then the second piece is, well, how do we avoid that? And this is part of that developing habits. So how do we strengthen the discipline muscle? Well, the first piece of that is you strengthen the discipline muscle by starting small. You have to start small sometimes. Not everybody can just, jump into a full morning routine where we're up at 5:30 and we're going to the gym and then we're cold plunging and then we're journaling and then we're eating a healthy breakfast and then we start our day. Maybe you just need to start with, I'm just going to wake up a half hour earlier every day this week. And then maybe you progress to, okay, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier. And then, okay, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier and go to the gym. And over time, you build that muscle, you build that discipline. So that way, instead of trying to do it all at once, which is a really difficult thing to do, you've built that discipline muscle. So when you do hit that barrier at the next level, it's not a drop from all or nothing. Instead, it's, oh, you know what? This morning I didn't go to the gym, but hey, I still woke up an hour earlier. So I'm awake. Maybe I'll do some breathing exercises. I'll do some extra journaling. And then tomorrow I go to the gym. So it's just these small little pieces of kind of resistance that you're trying to overcome. And that's just building that discipline muscle, building it until you have that discipline muscle built up enough that you take on even bigger tasks. And, for anybody who goes to the gym, it's very similar to starting from scratch. The first time you went to the gym, you didn't just throw on 2 plates and pump out, 10 reps of bench press. Most people started with the smaller dumbbells. They started, maybe it was 15s, maybe it was 20s, whatever it is. You just start with that lighter weight and, all right, I'm going to do a couple reps. And then next time, I'm going to do more sets and more reps. And then I'm going to throw on weight. And you build the strength and you build that. And it's no different with discipline. It's these small steps that build to bigger ones and bigger ones. And that's kind of where we talk about now how we actually build habits, because I believe the two are very correlated. As we've said, discipline is doing things that doing things when you don't want to do them because it's going to help you down the road. It's going to help you achieve your goal, whatever the case is. And I think habits are that. If you have good habits, in my mind, good habits are, you do things that are good for you even when you don't want to, even when the motivation's not there to do it, because that's just part of who you are. That is your habit. So, how do we develop the habit of waking up and going for a run? Well, there's a bunch of different things we can do. There's a bunch of different tactics. Tactic number 1, make it as easy as possible to wake up and go for the run. So have your clothes prepped in the morning. Have your shoes by your bed. That way, as soon as that alarm goes off, you look up and you see the clothes, you see the shoes, you see your watch, whatever it is, and okay, it's right there. So have your running route mapped out. Know where you're going, know where you're running. Have your podcast picked out or the music that you want to listen to. Make it as easy for you to get out of that bed, put the clothes on, and get out the door. Because once you're out the door, you're there. You've started, you're running, and you're more likely to, achieve that goal or perform the action. And that will become the habit. The second piece is accountability. And this is something that, again, it's a give and take, because ideally we want you to have discipline in those moments where there's nobody to hold you accountable, right? And that is a tough thing to do. That is probably one of the most difficult parts about having discipline. But maybe in order to get started, you need accountability from somebody else. Kind of like when you start at the gym, maybe the first couple times you work out, you need a spotter. Or when you're striving for a heavier weight to lift heavier, you need a spotter. You need somebody to have your back to help you lift that weight. It's no different when we're trying to build habits. If you're trying to build the habit of, waking up and going for a run, or trying to build the habit of eating healthy meals, maybe for the first little while, you need somebody that you actually can be accountable to. So maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a spouse, a partner, family member, whoever it is, somebody that has regular check-ins with you to say, hey, how's it going? Have you been doing your things? Have you been, eating properly? Have you been doing whatever your goal is, whatever you're trying to achieve, whatever you're trying to build discipline towards? And having that person keep you accountable is just going to make it a little bit easier, because it's a lot easier to fall out of accountability and fall out of habits when nobody's there to know, when nobody knows it. And that is a difficult thing. So it's the idea of we might need accountability from other people early on in order to build that habit and help build us that muscle. That way, down the road, we don't need anybody anymore. We can do it on our own. Another common tactic for building habits is the use of, sometimes it's reward or sometimes it's discipline. And, I've listened to a lot of podcasts around this. I've read some books. I've just heard people speak on it. And it sounds to me like there's a lot of different takes on it. So I'm going to give my take, which is you can use reward or you can use punishment or discipline, or however you want to word it, in order to form a habit. But whatever one you choose, it has to be real for you. It has to be meaningful for you. So what I mean by that is, let's use reward as an example. Let's say you're the type of person that you say, I want to start a new habit of I want to do 30 minutes of exercise every single day, 7 days a week. And if I achieve that, then I will give myself this reward. So every day that you run 30 minutes, you allow yourself to, have a piece of chocolate, or you give yourself, whatever, every night you're allowed to watch your favorite episode of your TV show. Or on the flip side, if you don't go running, the punishment. So, okay, if I don't go running, I'm not allowed to watch my show, or I'm not allowed to do this. Whichever one you choose, that's ultimately up to you, whatever you feel is the most impactful for you. There is some research to show that reward is better than punishment. That being said, there's a lot of high achieving people out there that are featured all over the podcast world that say they use the punishment form because it works for them. So whichever one you choose is up to you. I advocate for the reward system, but again, whatever is best for you, you have to do. The point is, it has to be meaningful. So, for example, I always started with, if I did my cold plunge in the morning, I would reward myself by allowing myself to take, a 10-minute really hot shower. That was my reward. And if I didn't cold plunge, then it would be just a normal quick little shower, whatever the case was. And even though it sounds funny, me knowing that I was going to get that reward of that hot shower and I could just sit in there and warm back up and whatever the case is, made it a lot easier to go into that plunge at the start, because it was like, okay, I'm going to be cold, but I know I'm going to get this reward. And it's contradictory to discipline, because in discipline, we're doing something without knowing we might achieve reward down the line, but it's about building that habit. And then what ended up happening when I was doing it for 30 days straight that month, I would say probably 2 weeks in, there's days where I would forget to do the hot shower, or days where I didn't have time, or whatever the case was, but I still did the cold plunge because all of a sudden it became a habit. And in those moments where I didn't want to do it, I was like, oh, you know what? I have the discipline to do it because this is who I am. This is what I do. And so it's this unique balance of using a reward system to get us across the line. And then once we are, then that habit is formed, and now we no longer need the reward, and we can actually remove it, and we can still have the good habit. And so if that reward, though, isn't meaningful to you, it's not going to be effective. So if my reward was hot showers, and I'm the type of person who couldn't care less about a hot shower, it doesn't matter. It's not going to help me. And this is where you have to tailor it to yourself, because some people have things they really love. Some people might really love coming home from work and throwing their feet up and watching their favorite show for an hour. Well, maybe you're the type of person that wants to use the punishment form and say, okay, if I don't go for my run in the morning, I don't get to watch my show. And again, it comes back down to, do you have somebody who's going to hold you accountable at that? Somebody who's going to turn off the TV if you try to turn it on? All these different things. So it is a process, and you have to tailor it to yourself. But these are hopefully the tools that you can use to start to build that reward system, build those habits, and ultimately, build that discipline muscle. And another piece to that I really did want to touch on as well is there's a lot of, speculation or opinions around, okay, are morning routines important? Are they helpful? Especially in the business world, you hear a lot of these very successful people talking about how they have these, hour and a half, 2 hour long morning routines. And then there's been other successful business people who've come in and kind of like bashed them and said, oh yeah, they do that now, but when they were trying to become successful, when they're on their grind, they weren't doing that. And so what I'm saying in this episode is, forget whether you should or shouldn't for those reasons, but rather, is it important to you for other reasons? And what I mean by that is, for me, doing my morning routine, yes, is there health benefits with doing a cold plunge? The science says there probably is, but I'm not a scientist myself. I've done a bit of research. I've seen that there is elements of it, but I'm sure there's lots of evidence going both ways. Is it important to plan your day and journal? I'm sure there's elements of people who are more efficient when they plan their day out. I'm sure there's elements of mental health for journaling, all these different things. But the reality for me was, when I did my morning routines, again, I was building that discipline muscle. I was building these good habits. So, when I got up and I forced myself to get into that cold plunge, even though I didn't want to, maybe there isn't health benefits, and I might not see those until way down the line. But it was a lot easier when I did it in the morning to then at 4:00, hold back from having that snack when I'm, really hungry and I'm just finishing the workday, but I'm not going to have that piece of candy. Or, 6:00 hits and I kind of just want to scroll on social media and just whatever, kind of chill out in that sense. But instead, I should actually be doing some of my marketing work for my other business or whatever it is. It made those decisions later in the day a lot easier to make. It made me more disciplined later in the day because I started my day with my routine, and that was my first thing checked off my list. That was my first achievement of the day. And you just layer those little achievements, those little layers of discipline over and over, and then all of a sudden that's how that muscle grows. So, for anybody who's out there who's saying, oh yeah, the cold plunges, it's not actually true, it doesn't actually help you, it's not health benefits, whatever the case is, that may be the truth. But those are second to what it's doing for me, which is forcing me to make a tough decision in the moment because I want to build that discipline to say I can do a hard task every single morning. No matter what, cold, hot, rain, or shine, I can do a difficult thing every morning when I wake up. And when the next difficult thing comes, I can achieve that too because I have the discipline to do it. So, yeah, there's a ton that you can break down from this episode. I mean, I could talk on this for hours because I think there's just so many different avenues and there's no one answer. There's no one size fits all. But really, when I break it down and try and, I guess, sum up this episode, it's the idea that mistakes will be made. Habits are formed and easily, broken. It's not a perfect world, but you have to have the willingness to say, I'm going to do my best to form these habits. I'm going to, be disciplined enough to consistently try over and over again. And then hopefully you can use some of these tools like the reward system, like the accountability of somebody else, all these different things to give you the best chance to be successful in creating good habits and developing that discipline muscle. And I really, really do believe that people who have high levels of discipline actually will find a lot more enjoyment and freedom in their life, because the person who's disciplined enough to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to bed at 9 p.m. may seem like they're not enjoying their life as much to other people, maybe the people who stay up late and whatever, but that person also is likely disciplined in other areas of their life, meaning, all right, that person who's disciplined enough to eat healthy 5 days a week can actually go on the weekend and have a drink and eat, unhealthy food and not feel like crap the entire week and not worry about health implications because, hey, yeah, they, one day a week, twice a week, they do let go, but they're disciplined enough throughout the week. Whereas the person who just, drinks whenever they want, eats whatever they want, there's a good chance that you will end up being a slave to other things down the road. That's not always the case, but the person with the discipline to not have complete freedom in everything they do will have more freedom in the long term, and you're less likely to, face those barriers down the road. Again, there are exceptions, and there's lots of people who might, live without any discipline, any routines, any habits, and be super successful and super happy and super healthy, and that's amazing. But this is for the majority of people. Majority of the people, for example, person who smokes a pack a day, majority of those people are going to end up sick in some form. There's always going to be the people who can smoke a pack a day and be totally fine and end up without any illness whatsoever. But those people are the outliers, the anomalies. They aren't the regular, they aren't the norm. And so this is for the majority, the people who think, yeah, you know what, I do need this in my life. I want to be more disciplined. I want to have better habits because I think it'll help me be more successful. This is where you begin. You begin with little daily discipline action steps that you build up that discipline muscle. So when those bigger moments come, you're equipped to face them. So yeah, to finish off for today's episode, as always for their solo episodes, we finish off with a quote. And so this quote is from John C. Maxwell. And the quote goes, "Motivation gets you going, but discipline keeps you growing. That is the law of consistency." Yeah, I think that quote fits really well with today's episode because, we talked about the idea of wanting to build habits and build discipline and make change. And when you're motivated, it's really easy to do that. It's really easy, when you're laying in bed and it's 10 p.m. and you're excited to go work out in the morning and you're excited to start your new routine. And then all of a sudden, 5:45, that alarm rings. And in that moment, that motivation is, for the most part, gone. And in those moments, that's where discipline takes over. So the motivation might get you started. It might encourage you. It might, get you off the line and get you ready to go. But it's going to be the discipline that keeps you consistent and keeps you doing these things when the motivation's not there. And so in many ways, discipline's your best friend when motivation's not there. And so, yeah, I think that quote fits really well with today's episode, just because I think a lot of times people will confuse discipline and motivation. The person who is really excited to go and work out or to start eating healthy or, to start a business. And then the people will be like, oh, that person is so disciplined, they started a business. Okay, maybe when they're motivated. But what about those moments when they're not? What about those moments, like we said, when nobody's around and nobody's looking, when nobody's there to hold you accountable, when you're by yourself? That's when your true discipline shows. And a lot of times, motivation isn't there in those moments. And so the disciplined people will continue on, and they will remain consistent, and they will continue to achieve the things they want to achieve. And the people who lack discipline will, I think, regress in those moments where there's not the motivation. So a great quote, I think, to tie it all together and to end us off today. I'm looking at the script, and I got a little bit off track in moments today. I think it's just because such a great topic that I really enjoy talking about. I'm really passionate about. So we'll definitely have to revisit this because there's things I missed, and there's things that'll overlap and things that'll change as I learn more, and as we as an audience grow together. But I think it was a really good start, and I hope there was pieces here that you can take away that will help you in your day-to-day and in your habits, and in forming habits and forming good habits, and in your forming that discipline muscle and developing it. And hopefully it can help you ultimately achieve more discipline, achieve better habits, and help you unlock your potential. So thanks to everybody who tuned in. I appreciate it. See you next time.